You are now tuned in to The Daily Dose, a daily podcast produced by the Minority Cannabis Business Association, focused on trending headlines in the cannabis industry and how they will affect minority entrepreneurs who are risking it all to make the jump from the legacy market into the regulated cannabis industry. If you support an equitable cannabis industry, then you're an ally of MCBA, and we want you to join the movement for a better tomorrow. Now sit back and relax. We've got your Daily Dose loading up. Special shout out to this month's sponsor of the show, Indiva Advisors. You can check them out at indivaadvisors.com. They are a leading accounting firm dedicated to the cannabis industry. They navigate complex tax, financial, and regulatory changes to make sure that your business is compliant and efficient. They focus on you so you can focus on your business. You can check them out at indivaadvisors.com. That's INDIVA advisors.com. Now we'll get right into today's headlines and today's Daily Dose. Aloha, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Daily Dose. Today is Tuesday, January 24th, 2023. I'm one of your co-hosts, Kaliko Castillo, president of the board here at the Minority Cannabis Business Association. And as always, we're joined by my co-host, Precious, our comms manager. What up, Precious? How's it going? Ooh, you're muted.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Dose. And Click, I know you're going to take this one away.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about New York opening its first Black-owned dispensary. Its first announcing its first dispensary that is held by somebody who has had some sort of run-in with the law and prohibition itself, and now being able to actually be able to benefit from the legal marketplace. Before we jump into that, I actually wanted to take a moment to really highlight. Precious just was able to be at an event with Martin Luther King III, along with a bunch of other cannabis luminaries, marking sort of the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. But also, you were up there in Boston hosting an event. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the event itself and just how things went? It looks awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It really was a very inspirational event. It really was a very inspirational event. We were there to discuss something that I think is rarely discussed when we go to these conferences or cannabis events, which is the workers' rights. You know, without employees, without the people there in the dispensaries, the cultivation shops, manufacturing areas, and so on and so forth, we wouldn't really have an industry. And when it comes to workers and unions, you know, that's something that's also not discussed. So it was sponsored by UFCW. And of course, we know the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a huge proponent of unions and unionization and the power of labor unions to support equity for industries and for people of color to have rights. So it was great to hear from Martin Luther King III on that same issue, but now on the new and emerging cannabis industry, on why it's important that workers are offered the opportunity to unionize to ensure that while, you know, entrepreneurs and operators, and we know how much money comes from the cannabis industry, that there's also, you know, good employees there who are held to standards to make sure that, employers that are held to standards to make sure that their employees have, you know, a little bit more than just the basic rights, you know, good health care, time off when needed, and so on and so forth. So it was great to be there with some of our favorites in the cannabis industry, including Al Harrington, Ross McCarthy, Shailene Title, Candy Angel, just to name a few. And then even folks that are not in the cannabis industry, like we heard a lot from UFCW and really got to understand their mission. We also heard from Michael Curry from the NAACP, and we've been seeing a lot of movement from the NAACP on cannabis, on legalization, on equity there. So it was just a great mashup. Shout out to Marvin Bing and all the organizers who put that together, because again, it's very rare that we talk about rights for cannabis workers. It's usually about the entrepreneur and the operator. So this was just really, I think, something that we need to keep discussing, because there are large shops that look to stop unionization. And that's still a reality in the cannabis industry. So it was great to be able to address it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being there representing MCBA and also just having the opportunity, like you said, to be in the presence of history, being able to talk about this really important issue that doesn't often get enough attention in the cannabis industry, and that is workers' rights. And I do think before we jump into the main story today, like if you're just starting your cannabis business and starting to build out your business plan, if you're thinking about having your workers be able to be part of a union and all the things that would go into that ahead of time, you're thinking about that ahead of time as you're building out your business plan, then you're going to be profitable building that into your business plan rather than later on down the road feeling like you got to come back in when the workers want to unionize and then you feel like you're having to give something away. If you actually build it into the beginning, it all works. Your workers benefit, and then you benefit as a business because happy workers mean you have a better business. So, shout out to Precious and everybody else that was there at that event. It looked awesome. Today's story that we wanted to jump into is out of New York, and we're just covering a press release straight out of Governor Hochul's office today. A major milestone for New York State's cannabis industry with January 24th today opening in Manhattan. Supported by the New York Cannabis Social Equity Investment Fund, dispensary provides opportunity to fast track sales and build initial capital for licensees. So Governor Kathy Hochul announced today the first conditional adult use retail dispensary license in New York State, owned by an entrepreneur previously criminalized by cannabis prohibition and supported by the New York Social Equity Cannabis Investment Fund. So, just a real quick pause. Remember, just a couple weeks ago, we had covered the very first dispensary in New York opening. This was not that at the time was a nonprofit, Housing Works, right? Not a what they call it, a justice involved individual like we're talking about here. So this is the first individual, the first person who's owning it, and someone who has actually been caught up in the system and been a justice involved individual now getting their license. So this new spot is opening up at 144 Bleecker Street in Manhattan. The store opening helps advance New York's goal of equity in cannabis licensing, which prioritizes providing licenses to justice involved individuals who are people with a cannabis conviction or a close relative of someone with one. So this is a really big deal, like we talked about, moving and shifting from this first dispensary that opened for a nonprofit, which itself was history making and a big deal, to now this other individual, justice involved individual, now being able to get a license. The dispensary is called Smacked LLC. It will be owned and operated by Roland Connor, with a soft opening as a pop up through February 20th. So this is an interesting concept that New York is actually working on as they're rolling out these dispensaries. Basically, this soft pop-up sort of situation. I'm going to read a little bit more about that. The pop-up program is designed to give the operator initial training opportunities before opening full-time and will benefit all businesses involved in the cannabis supply chain, including farmers who have cannabis ready for distribution, processors who are making cannabis into other types of products, distributors and retail operators, as well as consumers who are seeking access to safer products they can trust. So I actually think this is kind of interesting. It's a novel idea that you would basically kind of run the dispensary through a soft opening and a little bit of a soft launch. Because for a little bit more background about the conditional adult use dispensary licenses that they're giving out here, and the folks specifically that are taking part in the social equity program and getting help from the social equity investment fund, these folks basically are benefiting from the program where the state is actually going out and negotiating retail locations for these dispensary owners. So they're not just giving them funds and then the dispensary owner is sort of like spending it however they wanted. The sort of starting with getting them retail space, which is, you can imagine, in Manhattan, has got to be crazy, right? So they actually had the state identify originally 3,500 potential locations, narrow that down to about 20 something hundred, and then eventually ended up with 350 possible locations for these conditional adult use dispensaries. So then the state goes in and actually negotiates the leases and the terms with these landowners, right? These people who actually own the properties, and then basically the state acts as a subleaser or sub agreement to actually lease those out to the social equity applicant, right? So it's a really novel concept in the very beginning, in that basically the state's trying to hand over these turnkey operations to the dispensary owners, where the dispensary owner is still able to come in and help, affect what it looks like, and they basically get they are given a design and build team who also then comes in and actually helps build out the dispensary up to the place where they open, right? So it's really interesting, once again, how New York is going about this. A, making sure that social equity folks and folks who have been justice impacted are actually getting the first licenses, even if it means they've only rolled out 2 licenses, right, so far. Um, but it also means they're doing all of this work on the back end, which is one of the biggest headaches. And I know you can probably attest to this, Specialist,
Yeah.
about trying to lock down real estate to be able to run your operation. So I think
Yeah.
it's really fascinating that they're having this pop-up program, doing a soft launch up till February 20th. But then as I was reading into the details and digging in a little bit, it really is because of all of the work the state's doing on the back end to make sure that these folks are really ready to go on official day one of a big opening rather than a sort of soft launch. So super interesting that I kind of double clicked on the details and learned a little bit more about that today. But interested on your opinions, Precious, as someone who's obviously operating, becoming a licensee in New Jersey, and obviously have had to look at how much real estate costs and all of the costs associated with getting opening, because basically the state of New York is, in theory, not in theory, they're actually in practice covering all of the cost up to opening time as it relates to startup costs.
Yeah. Again, what New York plans were very much so unheard of. They were very lofty and what we were all very much excited about. I just always thought the timeline was in there. And essentially, that's what we're seeing. These businesses aren't able to just regularly roll out and open. For example, Smack is going to close on February 20th. And then in partnership with Dasney, they're going to put in about another $1 million into another space that's going to really, be able to support the type of, bandwidth they'll have. You got to understand there are only 2 dispensaries now that you can legally operate that are legally operated in New York for all of New York. And you're gonna see, large numbers and you're gonna see those influxes. So, we talk about real estate all the time when it comes to the cannabis industry. I said the 3 Trojan horses of getting into the industry has always been legal, real estate, and funding. Like those are the 3 things that really just make everything come together. And the thing about real estate is that it doesn't just come easy, especially in a place like New York, where buildings are upwards of millions of dollars. Not even to mention buildings that you have to renovate and put more money into to bring online. Not to mention landlords who are also sharp sometimes and are creating predatory deals for you to even engage them on a prime property. There's so many things that go into really securing your real estate that honestly, I think that's one of the main barriers, even probably before funding, if you're going to be in a space that requires a brick and mortar, if you didn't already have a real estate background. And essentially, that's where your funding goes to. A lot of the funding goes to securing real estate, holding that property, and doing any of the renovation. So that's why when New York announces its $200 million fund and its partnership with Dasney to bring these dispensaries online, it was very exciting. And it still is exciting to see that these entrepreneurs are being supported in that nature. Now, are we going to see, the rest of the 36 or so card licenses have the similar rollout? Potentially, with those kind of like mini soft openings and then come back later. That's if we can see any of them continue to open, over the next couple months. What does that look like? Mind you, there's still an injunction on New York holding off licensing for many other areas in New York, but OCM has said that they're going to continue to pursue licensing. I know new licensees are being announced soon when it comes to delivering the rest of those card licenses. So you have to think there's only going to be more people coming, more stores coming online. But what is that timeline for them to actually start to operate? And keep in mind, there are over 100 licensed conditional cultivators out there in New York that are currently growing. Where is that product actually going? To just these 2 dispensaries? The supply chain imbalance to New York has always frazzled me, but I'm very excited to see just the support around, one of the first Black-owned, justice-involved cannabis companies to come on, because it really does symbolize a lot. It's greater than a lot of people think. It symbolizes a lot for a place like New York. And I'm just hoping that they're going to be given the amount. Like I've always said, social justice, social equity, rather, is also about maintenance and sustenance in the industry. That's how we build longevity. That's how we build generational wealth as Black and brown people. And to have that, we're needing support from all areas, from our city that we're in to the state that we're operating in, from our community and so on and so forth. And I do believe these car licenses have that. It's just a matter of it materializing altogether.
Yeah, we definitely got to keep up the pressure and make sure that as these laws are being implemented, not only in New York but in other states, that we're making sure that people are, the people in power, the actual regulators, and the folks who are implementing the regulations are actually doing so. Obviously, they're doing it thoughtfully here, but doing it with the quickness and with the speed, understanding sort of what other folks have on the line right now. So I do think this has been really awesome. I do want to give a shout out to Mr. Roland Connor, obviously of Smacked. Shout out to their team. I think this is an amazing opportunity for them. And I wanted to read a quote from his quote from this press release. It says, "I'm so excited to become a part of history as the first individual to open a legal dispensary in New York City. Given my experience with cannabis, I never could have imagined that I would be opening a store like this. I'm grateful for the opportunity to open a business with my son and my wife at my side and to build generational wealth working together right here in New York. But this is not just about me and my family. This is about everyone who was harmed by the draconian drug laws of the past. New York's commitment to righting those wrongs through the law is inspiring, and I am proof of that commitment because I'm standing here today." So shout out to Smack, shout out to Roland Connor. Really hope that you guys are successful in this initial phase, and as things roll out and you get your official license, hope things continue to grow. I think this is, once again, a really novel idea that New York is rolling out. I think it's not going to be without pitfalls. There's going to be plenty of reasons to with good faith, criticize what's going on in the program, but we also need to be able to highlight and celebrate these moments because this is history. Is literally the first individual to get a legal license to sell cannabis in New York City. And obviously, there's a lot of headlines about the illicit cannabis dispensaries that are still open in New York. So I think it's really important that we do lift up Roland Connor and Smacked right here, and give a big shout out to them, and a shout out to New York State for trying to do what they can to make this easier for justice involved individuals and people of color who are trying to make it in the cannabis industry. So that's awesome news out of New York. I know we got some more news later this week that we'll be covering. I know Washington State's about to be rolling out their social equity program after initially legalizing almost 10 years, more than 10 years ago now. So that's going to be interesting. We'll be covering that later this week. I know we got some interviews still being lined up and rescheduled with some folks that we'll be coming out with. If you guys haven't already, please make sure you're liking and subscribing on YouTube, liking and subscribing, and leaving us feedback on all of the podcast platforms. Next week on the 25th is when we got our business plan. Excuse me, that's tomorrow. It's the 24th. Tomorrow we have a business plan, small business education series webinar. How can people sign up for that, Precious? What's the best way for people to go?
Yeah,
sign up for the newsletter?
You can definitely follow our newsletter, follow all of our socials. I'll even drop it here in the chat for you to go ahead and register for the Zoom. But it's definitely going to be something that you don't want to miss, especially if you're in those initial phases of building your business. You need to put together all of your financial models, your marketing plans, and make it into a concise business plan. You'll hear from experts on exactly how to do that. So I'm super excited about it. And I also want to say one more thing about Smack. Like, shout out to the name and shout out for getting back to the culture. Like, no more of these prissy names that dance around, cannabis things. I know marketing laws and everything are super strict and regulations, but it really is just an ode to the culture in and of itself. And I love it.
Yeah, I know, big ups, like you said, like being able to stick to the culture. I think it's a good point that you make about marketing restrictions being tough these days. But I think being able to do that and knowing that you're getting support from the state is awesome. So shout out to Smack, shout out to Roland Connor, and shout out to everyone who is a member of MCBA and everyone listening to this Daily Dose podcast on a regular basis. We appreciate it. I guess we'll be back tomorrow with more headlines. But until then, thank you, Precious, for being here and everybody else for listening. Aloha.
Bye.